Okay, so, you might have seen this in the headlines this week, actually, um, about former President Trump. And, well, there are these reports going around about him firing the top military lawyers,
Hmm.
like all the judge advocate generals, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and
Yeah, I saw those.
yeah, it's the kind of news that makes you like stop and think like, whoa, what is going on here?
Definitely, yeah.
So that's actually what we're going to be diving into today, trying to
Right.
figure out what does this actually mean? What is the significance of this? And to do that, we're going to be looking at some recent news reports and also getting some insights from someone who has experience in the JAG Corps.
Right.
So, trying to get a clearer picture of what all of this actually means.
Right.
So to start off, I guess maybe we should even just like take a step back and just say like, what is the Judge Advocate General Corps? Like, what is this? What are we even talking about?
Yeah. So the Judge Advocate General's Corps is basically professional legal officers within each branch of the armed forces. So they're kind of the military's expert lawyers. And, they have them in the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Coast Guard.
Okay.
And so each branch has a Judge Advocate General, which is their chief legal officer. And they advise on all legal matters.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's like the top lawyer for each branch of the military.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let's look at the reporting here. The Hill actually had a story about this, and they quoted Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Okay.
This was actually on Monday. When this report came out, and they said that these JAGs that were reportedly fired were seen as potential roadblocks to President Trump's orders.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's pretty pointed, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And they also highlighted in the article that one of the core things that the JAGs do is to provide independent legal guidance to senior military officers.
Right.
So whether that's in the Pentagon or if it's actually, out in the field on the front lines, they're there to help navigate all of the complex legal stuff that comes along with armed conflict and international law and all that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you hear something like that, what is it that like jumps out at you?
I think what's really interesting there is that word roadblocks.
Yeah.
It really makes it seem like there might be a conflict
Yeah.
between what the political leaders want and what the military's legal responsibilities actually are.
Yeah.
And I think what's important there, too, is that the article says that the JAG Corps provides independent legal guidance.
Yeah.
So they're not there just to rubber stamp anything.
Right.
They're there to make sure that whatever the military is doing is actually legal.
Yeah, it's like a check.
Exactly.
Okay, so what does this actually look like day to day for a JAG officer? I mean, is it like all super dramatic courtrooms like you see on TV?
Not really. I mean, some JAG officers do work on court-martials and other judicial stuff.
Okay.
But actually, most of what they do is advising commanders at all different levels.
Oh.
So like you have a platoon leader who's having
Right.
tactical decisions out in the field.
Right.
And then you have the highest level civilian leaders who are setting policy. And everywhere in between, you have to think about what's legal.
Yeah.
So JOGA officers are there to give advice on all sorts of things,
Like what? What kind of things would they be advising on?
like the laws of war. So like what you can and can't do during a conflict,
Okay.
or the rules of engagement for specific missions.
Okay.
And of course, the Geneva Conventions, which are all about how you treat prisoners and civilians.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah. So it's a pretty wide range.
Wow. So they really have their hands in a lot of different things.
Yeah, definitely.
So this kind of brings us to this other point that was highlighted in one of our sources about how JAG officers have to advise on whether a specific order is actually lawful.
Right.
And I mean, the source actually uses the phrase lawless presidential administration,
Oh, wow.
which is pretty strong, right?
Yeah.
To describe this particular context. So why is it so important for JAG officers to give this guidance on whether something is actually lawful or not?
Well, I think it's really important because it's a way to protect the military's integrity
Okay.
and make sure that it follows the rule of law. I mean, in any organization, it's important to know what's legal and what's not.
Right.
But especially in the military, which has so much power,
Yeah.
you really need to be careful.
Right.
And that's where JAG officers come in.
Okay.
They're trained to look at an order and say, hey, is this legal?
Right.
And they know domestic law, international law, and the Constitution.
Wow. Okay, so they're like the experts.
Yeah. So if there's ever a question about whether an order is legal, they can step in and say, hold on, this might not be right.
It's like a check.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's easy to think about the military as this kind of like big unified thing.
Right.
But when we're talking about the JAG Corps, it's actually pretty big in itself, right?
Yeah.
Like, how big are we talking?
Well, just in the Army, there's something like 2,000 active duty JAG officers.
Wow.
And then across all the branches of the military, it's about 5,000.
Okay.
And then there are thousands more in the reserves. So it's a pretty big group.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. And these are people who have gone to law school and passed the bar exam.
Right.
And they've chosen to have a career in the military, making sure that everything the military does is legal and constitutional.
So they really are experts.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
And one thing that our source really emphasized was this principle that service members have to obey lawful orders, but they have to disobey unlawful orders.
Right.
And that's not just like a suggestion or, a good idea.
Definitely not.
It's like a really important rule.
It's fundamental.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something that's drilled into every JAG officer right from the start.
Okay.
So like in ROTC and officer basic training. And then again at JAGs, it's really emphasized that if you get an unlawful order, you have to disobey it.
Wow. So it's like really serious.
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
Because it means that you have a duty to follow the law, even if it means disobeying an order from a superior.
That's really interesting. Okay, so we also got a chance to hear from someone who's actually been there and done that
Oh, okay.
in this field.
Hey.
So we looked at a YouTube transcript featuring Glenn Kirshner.
I know him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's a former Army JAG prosecutor.
Oh, wow.
He worked on some really serious cases like death penalty cases and espionage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did he think about all of this?
Well, he basically said that he thinks Trump firing those JAG officers is a dramatic miscalculation. And he said that because he knows how important the JAG Corps is
Okay.
and how committed they are to upholding the law.
Right.
And he's coming from a place of experience
Yeah.
because he's worked on some pretty high stakes cases in the military justice system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let's kind of try to understand the why here.
Okay.
Like, why would these JAGs have been fired? The reporting says that they were seen as potential roadblocks.
Right.
So what kind of orders could they have objected to that would have led to this?
Well, we don't know for sure,
Right.
but we can kind of guess based on what we know about what JAG officers do.
Okay.
So maybe they thought some proposed rules of engagement were illegal,
Okay.
or they questioned whether some operations were legal under international law, or maybe they advised against something because they thought it would violate the Constitution.
Right.
So basically, they would be flagging any orders that they thought might be illegal.
Okay. And this kind of ties back to this idea of loyalty, right? We
Yeah.
saw a quote from General Milley where he said that the military's loyalty is to the Constitution
Right.
and not to any one individual leader.
Right.
So how do the JAG officers fit into that?
I think JAG officers are a really good example of that principle in action because their main job is to uphold the law, and that includes the Constitution.
Right.
So if they think an order from a superior, even the president,
He's illegal.
legal,
Yeah.
they have to say something.
Okay.
And that can cause some tension,
Yeah, definitely.
especially if the people giving the orders don't want to hear it.
It's like they're the watchdogs.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it seems like, by focusing on this whole roadblocks thing and how the JAGs are supposed to make sure everything is lawful,
Right.
the sources we looked at are kind of suggesting that these firings weren't just like a normal thing.
Yeah, I think so.
It's hard to imagine this being just like routine personnel changes
Right.
when the whole point is that these guys were raising legal concerns.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes you wonder about how much value was placed on having independent legal advice.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring everything together, I think what we're seeing here is that this whole thing about firing these top military lawyers really shows just how important the JAG Corps is
Definitely.
in making sure that the military stays within the law.
Yeah.
And it really shows how important it is that they're able to give independent legal advice
Right.
and even challenge orders that they think are illegal,
Right.
which is like a core part of their job.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like their duty.
Right.
Yeah.
It's baked right into their training.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
So, I think this really raises some big questions about the relationship between political leaders and the military. Like, where's the line?
Yeah. What happens when they disagree?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it also makes you think about the checks and balances within the military itself. Like, what happens when you get rid of that legal expertise?
Yeah. What happens when you don't want to hear what the lawyers have to say?
Right. And what does that mean for the military's commitment to the Constitution.
Exactly.
Which is supposed to be like the ultimate authority.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, it's a lot to think about.
it is a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Like, what are the long-term effects of this
Right.
on the military, you know?
Yeah. Does it change how the military operates?
Right. And, just kind of like how the military conducts itself.
Yeah.
Is it going to be different in the future?
Yeah.